Welcome to 16 Weeks of Sats with me, Andrew. This is week 2, and in week 2 we're going to be covering decimal addition, decimal subtraction, and the general overall concept of how we lay out questions that involve decimals. Now, this week we need to consider addition, we need to consider subtraction. There are going to be some questions in there that involve varied representation, but also probably one of the most significant question types, which is subtracting from whole numbers. And we will go over that in a lot of detail. As per usual, we're going to have lots of examples. Versus last week, I've quadrupled the amount of practice questions that you have to be able to do when you pause the video, plus lots of extra SATs examples as well for us to go through. So there's some little tweaks this week that will hopefully make your experience much better. So we're going to get straight into it this week. But just before we do that, I'm just going to give some quick shout outs to people who've commented on the videos over the last week, which has really made it worthwhile doing. So I just want to say a big thanks and big shout out to Queen's Road Academy. We've got students who are learning in Kilhampton, Lucy in Billingham. We've got St Helens Primary School in Hartlepool, my old school. So a big shout out to Mr Newing and everybody there. We've got St Mary's in Maltby and Mrs Kitchen. We've got Mrs O'Hagan and Mrs Janes. We've got Paganel School. We've got Jens who's learning as well. And we've got Devonshire Primary Academy as well. So there's a whole host of pupils, parents, teachers and schools that are getting involved in the videos. So it's great to be able to give you a little bit of a shout out and just recognise the fact that you've got involved. So that's it from me to start with. We're going to get straight into decimal addition and look at how we lay out these questions and get those marks, those easy marks, for our SATs arithmetic paper.
So let's dive straight into the first examples when it comes to addition and the use of a decimal. So the first thing that I always say when we look at these types of questions is, what's the problem? So what are the difficulties that we're going to encounter and what are we going to solve? And basically what we're going to look at is the problem that we have is the decimal within the question, and making sure, going back to last week, is how we lay this out effectively. So, and that's all decimal addition, subtraction come down to, is how can we ensure that we effectively lay out the questions, and that will give us the mark every time. Okay, so let's have a little look. Now, the first mistake that people will tend to make is, or the biggest mistake that I see is, if we just have a look, is we'll see children put the decimals in. So we've got 3.4. And this one's quite a straightforward question in terms of we've got a 1 and a tenth, and we've got a 1 and a tenth. So we can lay that out. But the biggest mistake we tend to see once this changes is that the decimal, because children don't quite understand place value, is that we get this issue of the decimals being placed in different columns. And that is essentially the biggest mistake that we're going to see within these questions. So I'm going to give you a top tip on how to avoid that, and then you can apply this to every other question that you're going to encounter. All right, so let's have a little look. Now, my little rule is spotting straight away any question where we see that we have a decimal in either of the numbers. It could just be this number. Either of the numbers, we're going to go straight to this strategy of laying out the decimals first. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to make sure, if we drop and get a quick highlight there, is we're going to make sure that we lay out the decimals all in the same column. All right, so we're going to lay the decimals out first in the two question areas, the rows for the numbers that we're going to put in, and also ready for the answer, because that's going to translate. Now, what that does, this is magical, because what that does, if you were involved in last week's lessons, is this creates place value. So we now have our ones column. Because we've got our decimal column, we've now got our ones column, which gives us our tens column, our hundreds column, and our tenths column, and our hundredths column, and our thousandths column. So we can note those in there. So by putting in our decimals, obviously you don't need to highlight, by putting our two decimals in for the two numbers within the question, two addends in this case, and then our sum, what we do is we create place value so that we can't essentially get this wrong now. So what we're going to do is, I'll give you this example. So we would have 3.4 add 2.7. And now we're in a really straightforward position where we can just add these together. So we would start in our 10th column, the furthest to the right. So we're going to start in this column here, and then we're going to move to the left like we would normally do. So 4 add 7 is 11. We're going to carry that 1, or that 1 into this column like we would do. So we're going to bridge over the decimal column because nothing's going to end up in there. And then we're now adding our 1's column. So we've got 3, add 2 is 5, add the 1 is 6. So we can then write that 6 in here. So we have 6.1. And all that comes back to is making sure that to begin with, that we have our decimals all in the same column. And what that creates is place value. So we have our 1's column, our 10's column, our 100's column. Once we've got place value with the decimals in the right place, we can then very, very easily lay out our questions. Let's look at another one. So here we go into the second question. So very, very similar situation. We've got our 2 decimals within the numbers that we've got. We've got 5.76 add 2.9. Now again, what's the problem? We've got 2 problems here. We've got the fact that we've got decimals in each question, but then in this number, we've got a 10th and a 100th. Sorry, yes, we've got a 10th and a 100th, and in this one, we've just got a 10th. So there's the potential for us to lay this out incorrectly. But again, we're just going to make sure that we lay out the decimals in the same column before we start answering the question. So we've got decimal, decimal, decimal. Now, my other little rule, it's not a rhyme, but it's a bit of a saying. When it comes to decimals, what I always like to say, a little thing to help us remember, is that our decimals all live in the same street. All right? So our decimals all live in the same street, but they live in their own house. And they live in the middle of their house. So we live on the same street in our own house in the middle of our house. All right. Now that's going to help us lay out decimals. So now we know we've got 5.76. We can just go 5.76. And then we've got 2.9. Now you can look into this square and think, oh, well, what goes here, Andrew? Well, you'll have all heard this before. We're going to add in a placeholder zero. So there's nothing there, but we need a 0 in here to make the question valid. And then we can just do the question. So we're going to do 6 add 0 is 6. Very straightforward. So we'll pop that one in there. 7 add 9 is 16. So again, we're going to put the 6 in, carry the 1. And then we've got 5. Add 2 is 7, add 1 is 8. So we would pop 8 in there. So we have 8.66. And that's a very, very straightforward way of solving what is potentially quite a problematic question. And because we see the decimals, we panic a little bit and we make questions more difficult than they need to be. When in fact, if we just lay out the decimals into their own column, where they live in the same street, they live in their own house, in the middle of their house, then we will get the answer correct, because then it's basically just column addition. Now in this question, we have exactly the same sort of issue. We've got 43.59 add 9.47. The problem being we've got tenths and hundredths, but in this instance we've only got a 1, and in here we've got a 1 and a 10. So again, it comes back to laying out the decimals in their own street, in their own house, in the middle of the house. And the reason why I do this, some people might look at that and say, it's not quite right, Andrew. The reason why I do this is because I think for lots of pupils, it creates real clarity around how to create place value. Lots of people would probably, your teachers have said to make sure that the decimals go here. Now, just in terms of presentation, for me, I think quite often in the small squared paper that you have, that all of a sudden questions, whatever the questions are, can become quite condensed. If we look at this very quickly, that's quite messy, and the presentation value, the clarity, can sometimes let us down, especially if we're not the neatest of writers. So by adding the decimals in their own column, like I'm going to do here, so before I've even answered the question, I'm putting my decimals in their own house on the same street, in the middle of their house. Not here, it must be in the middle. All right, and again, that is purely for presentation, but it's going to create clarity. Again, we know where the decimal is in the number, so we can just match that up. So we've got 43.59, add 9.47. So we've got 9.47. And we don't need a placeholder 0 here because that number is actually complete, 9.47, 43.9. So that's fine. So at this point, we've created complete place value. We've got our ones, we've got our tens, we've got our hundreds, we've got our tenths, and our hundreds. Perfect. Makes it very, very easy to start in this column here and to add the hundredths column together. So 9 add 7 is 16. We'll carry that 1. We've got 5 add 4 is 9. Add the 1 is 10. So that would be 0. Carry the 1. 9 add 1 is 10. Add 3 is 13. So we'll put in that and we'll carry the 1. And then 4 add 1 is 5. So straight away we've got 53.06. Very, very straightforward. Very, very simple. And all this comes back to is making sure that before we even start answering the question, we put in the decimals. Now, let's have a quick look at Sat's question. So again, very simple. I see the question, 5.87 add 3.123. So we've got all these decimal parts. So we've got tens, hundreds, thousands. Naturally, what would happen here is children mislay out the problem with the decimals. So again, before we even start, oops, I'll just go back because we've got a highlighter option. So I see decimals, I know I'm adding, so decimal, decimal, decimal. I can go 5.87, add 3, add 3.123, and I have my placeholder 0. Perfect. I'm now in a position to answer the question, which I'm really happy about. 0 add 3 is 3. 7 add 2 is 9. 8 add 1 is 9. 5 add 3 is 8. And then we must put the answer into the box. I know someone told me I need a little catchphrase for this. I'll have to go back to that. But we don't get the mark unless it ends up in this box. So we have 8.993. And we're really trying to make sure that this is extremely clear. Let's have a look at another question. Again, we've got 6.48 add 8.6. Again, autopilot, I see that we've got decimals, and I'm just going straight into decimal, 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 6.48 add 8.6, and then I've got my placeholder 0. Then I can go straight into answering this question really happily. 8 add 0 is 8. 4 add 6 is 10, so we put the 0 in and carry the 1. 6 add 8 is 14, add the 1 is 15. We can carry that, and then that's just going to drop down. Again, we must transfer this answer into the answer box. We've got 15 point. I'm just going to rub that out, actually. I'm worried that that's where I've not made the 5 particularly clear. So that's a good example of making sure that if we don't think it's clear, we'll get a rubber and we're going to write that again. So 15.08, and that would hopefully get us the mark. And finally, again, if you want to pause the video, pause it and have a go at this yourself. But again, we're just going to see its decimal addition. The problem is the decimal, so let's solve that problem by putting our decimals in first. Try not to get into the habit. I'll just do it on this one. Try not to get into the habit of going, oh, I can see its decimals. I'll do 56.38. And then there's maybe an opportunity for us to mispresent or misorder the decimals. If you're very, very confident, that's absolutely fine. But I'm a big fan, a big believer of just sticking to a routine, especially just getting a decimal, decimal, decimal. They're all in the same street, in their own house, in the middle of their own house, 56.38. And at this point, we're not really doing any maths. We're not really even having to think about anything here. But in doing this, I've solved the problem. And then I've just got basic maths. 8 add 0 is 8. 3 add 7 is 10. So we're going to bridge over the decimal into this column. 6 add 4 is 10. Add the 1 is 11. Carry the 1. 5 add 2 is 7. Add the 1 is 8. So we have 81.08, and we must put the answer in the box. It must go in here, 81.08. And again, autopilot, simple, job done. So, as I promised, this is definitely a time to pause. We've got some decimal addition questions. This is the column that I would suggest you start in. These are very, very straightforward questions using the strategy that I've just modeled to you. Then the questions will get progressively more difficult and challenging. You're very likely to encounter these sort of questions within the first 10 questions of the SATs paper. These ones again from sort of 3 or 4 to 15, and these ones are quite challenging to a certain extent. You may get these in the middle of the paper. I wouldn't expect any sort of addition and subtraction right at the back end of the paper. So have a go at these. Use your calculators to check your answers. If they are incorrect, go back to the strategy, do them again, and give them a little check. Right then, we can move straight into subtraction now, and the same principles run true. We're going to make sure that we've got a question, 9.16 take away 4.5. We see what's the problem? Our decimals are the issue, so we're going to make sure that we lay them out correctly to start with. Decimal, 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 and now I'm happy. 9.16 take away 4.5. And I'm going to have to produce my placeholder 0. Now I can get on with the question. And remember, because it's subtraction, we may have to use some exchanging. So the strategy still rings true. But because we've laid everything out effectively, we now have place value, which means we can effectively solve the question. So 6 take away 0 is obviously just 6. 1 take away 5. Now we can't do that. If we only have 1, we can't take away 5. So we're going to need to exchange from the 9. So let's do that now. So the 9 is going to become 8. And the 1 that we've borrowed is going to drop into this column here. So we've now got 11 take away 5, which is 6 also. So that's going to go into there. And then I'm left with 8 take away 4, which is 4. So I've got 4.66. If that was a SATs question, we would put that into the answer box. Very, very simple. Once again, we have another one. We've got 17.36 take away 8.371. So we've got three parts of the decimal here. We've got a tenth, hundredth, and a thousandth. Here, the problem is we've got a 1, and in this number, we've got a 1 and a 10. So there's a whole host of complicating factors. But again, what's the problem? Is the decimals. I see decimals in the question, so I'm just going to change that color because I don't want it. If I see decimals in the question, I want my decimals laying out first. Decimal, 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 all living in the same street, in their own house, in the middle of their house. So I can have 17.36 take away 8, because we know 8 is a 1, and it's in the column left of the decimal in the question, so it's going to be in the column left of the decimal when we lay it out. 8.371. And without having to think about it, we've created place value, which is exactly what we wanted. So we can start the question here. We're going to need to put in a placeholder 0, and then we can start the question. Obviously, it's in a different color there, but I'm not going to drop away now. So 0 take away 1. We can't do that, so we're going to need to exchange from the 6. So let's quickly do that. So we're going to borrow from the 6 and exchange. That's a 5. Now, in the thousandths column, we've got 10 take away 9. We can do that now. So, 10 take away 1, which is 9. 5 take away 7. Well, we can't do that. If we've only got 5, we can't take 7 away from it. So, we're going to need to exchange again. So, the 3 becomes 2. And the 1 that I borrowed from this column moves into the hundredths. So, I've now got 15 take away 7, which is 8. And then, again, 2 take away 3. We can't do that. So I'm going to need to exchange from the ones column. So there's quite a lot of work here. That becomes 6. And the 1 that we've exchanged is going to drop into this column. So we've got 12 take away 3, which we know is 9. And now I'm working in the ones column. So 6 take away 8. Once again, we've got another situation where 6, if we've only got 6, we can't take away 8. So we're going to need to exchange once again. So it leaves us 0 in this column. And we've now got 16 take away 8, which we know is 8. So that leaves us with 8.9 8.9889. So again, very effective because we have, if I just go to highlighting, we've created place value with this really effective layout of the decimal, and that is the key. Now, interestingly, in scanning through the SATs papers, I can only find one example of decimal subtraction, which was this one. So again, you're much more likely to find decimal addition questions in the SATs than you are decimal subtraction. But let's just smash it anyway. Here we go. So I see I've got a decimal problem. Whoops, I'm in highlighter mode again. Decimal, autopilot 29.5, take away 16.125. So I'm going to need to have some placeholder zeros. So again, straight away, I've got the issue that I'm going to need to exchange. 0 take away 5. I can't do that. There's nothing in the next column to borrow from, so I'm going to need to borrow from this column here. So let's do that now. So that's going to become 4. And the one that I'm borrowing has to go into here, or that I'm exchanging has to go into this column. I'm going to try again. Now I've done the first exchange. 0 take away 5. I still can't do it. And now I can borrow from this or exchange from this column here. So that 10 can now be crossed out and becomes 9. And the one that I've exchanged moves along into the thousands column. So 10 take away 5 is 5. Fantastic. 9 take away 2 is 7. 4 take away 1 is 3. 9 take away 6 is 3. 2 take away 1 is 1. And then we must put the answer into the box. Sounds like a pantomime. 13.375. Wonderful. Job done. Mark got it. Took a little bit of time, that one, but well worth it. And we've got the mark. We can move on. And again, notice that's question 19 in the SATs paper. So it's smack bang in the middle, maybe just beyond the middle. And that's probably about as difficult as you're going to get. So another fantastic opportunity to pause. So definitely pause this screen and have a go at these questions. Again, they're going to become progressively more difficult. So these are the more straightforward questions. Here, they're going to become a little bit more difficult, and then a lot more difficult just in terms of the variation and the types of numbers that you're using. But again, go back to the strategy. Decimals, they're living there. They're living there. The same street in their own house, in the middle of their house. If you can lay that out effectively to start with, you will get these questions right unless you make a mistake. And the beauty of this is that it takes away you really having to think too much about it. You know exactly what to do. You can just carry out the strategy. Job done. Now, these questions are probably the most important questions that we are going to cover today. Now, in the SATs papers that I've looked at, there are many, many of these questions. In, I think it was the 2019 paper, I could be wrong, there was at least 6 or 7 of these questions. And it's subtraction from a whole number. All right. And again, you might look at these and think, oh, no, there's a decimal in this number, but there isn't in this number. So what do I do? Now, again, it's very, very simple. You spot that this question has a decimal in it. We just go into the strategy because this number, the 8, is a 1. This number 3 is a 1. So it all comes back to place value. So these questions, for me, if I had 6 of these questions in a SATs paper, they are 6 easy marks. And children lose marks on these all the time because they're not sure how they lay this number out in relation to this number because they're not confident with place value. So I see the decimal, so I just do my decimal strategy. Decimal, decimal, decimal. If we want to think about place value, we've got our 1s, we've got our 10s, our 100s. 8 is clearly a 1. So we've got 8, and then we've got 3.42. Very simple. We've got our placeholder zeros now, and now we can solve the problem. Very, very simple. So 0 take away 2, we can't do that. There's nothing here in this column to exchange into it, so we're going to have to exchange from the 1s column and exchange along. But we've got to do that step by step. So the 8 becomes a 7, and the 1 that we've borrowed or exchanged moves into this column. Now I can try this again. 0 take away 2. Still can't do it, but now I can exchange from this column into here. So let's do that. The 10 becomes 9, and the one that I've borrowed or exchanged moves into this column. So now I'm in a position to solve the problem. 10 take away 2 is 8. Whoops. 10 take away 2 is 8. 9 take away 4 is 5. And 7 take away 3 is 4. And again, if it was a SATs question, we would need to put that into the box. But again, you will see lots and lots and lots of these in the SATs. Lots of marks will be lost. They are easy marks. You look for you see a decimal in one part of the question. We just go into decimal, 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 and lay it out effectively. Here's another quick example. Again, if you want to pause it, go for it, but I'm just going to get straight into it. I've spotted that I've got a decimal, I've got a whole number, and I've got 9.647. I can see a decimal. I just go into autopilot, decimal, 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 16, take away 9.647. So I've still got 16 there, take away 9.47. And we know that I'm going to have to do some exchanging, so we can do that now. Let's talk us through it. 0 take away 7, we can't do that. There's nothing to borrow from any of the columns next to us till we get to the 6. So I'm exchanging from the 6, which becomes 5. And then we got the one that we've borrowed goes into this column here. I can think back to the start. 0 take away 7, still can't do it. There's nothing here, but there's something here that we can borrow from. We've got 10. So I can cross that out. That becomes 9. And the 1's carried into here. 0 take away 7, still can't do it. But I can now exchange from the column next to me. So I've worked logically along. That becomes 9. The 1 exchanges into the thousands column. So I've got 10 take away 7, which is 3. 9 take away 4, which is 5. 9 take away 6, which is 3. 5 take away 9, we can't do that. So that leaves us nothing there as we exchange again. 15 take away 9 is 6. So again, this would go into the answer box and we would get the mark. But again, I want you to really not fear the fact that we've got a whole number take away a decimal number. Decimal, 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 job done. And this is where we get into the SATs example. So have a go at these on your own, pause and have a go. But again, 7, whole number, take away 2.25. Some of you will be able to do that mentally, but I'm just going to go decimal, 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 7, take away 2.25, placeholder 0, placeholder 0, and then I get into exchanging. 0 take away 5, I can't do that. The next point at which I can exchange from is the 1's column, so that becomes 6. 9. Okay, so 10 take away 5 is 5. 9 take away 2 is 7. 6 take away 2 is 4. So I've got 4.75. Put your answer into the box. 4.75. If you've got a suggestion for my catchphrase about putting it in the box, put the answer in the box. So 4.75. Again, pause if you need to, but straight into it. Got a whole number. We've got a decimal number with 3 decimal places. I see the decimal. I just go into my strategy. Decimal, decimal, decimal. 8. Take away 5.123. Actual SATs question number 23. Placeholder zeros. So we've got to do a lot of exchanging. So let's get straight into it. 0 take away 3. I can't do that. So that becomes 7. 0 take away 3. I still can't do it. So I'm going to exchange from this column into the next one. So that becomes 9. And then 10. 0 take away 3. Still can't do it. 10 becomes 9, and the one that we've exchanged comes into here. So we can now solve the problem. 10 take away 3 is 7. 9 take away 2 is 7. 9 take away 1 is 8. 7 take away 5 is 2. The answer goes into the box. Definitely sounds like a pantomime. 2.877. And that would hopefully get us 1 mark. Again, but I really want you to go away from this video. This is the most important, is making sure that you're very confident laying out the decimals in the same column where they live in their own house on the same street in the middle of their house. Again, let's do the next one. Decimal. Let's get the pen option. Decimal, decimal, decimal. 26. Take away 2.013. 2. We've got 3 placeholder zeros. So this is what you've got to see. When you see these whole numbers, you know that you're going to be exchanging along zeros. So again, we're going to 0 take away 2, we can't do it. So exchanging from the 6, that becomes 5. And we always have to exchange into the next column along and go through the process. 0 take away 2. Here, again, I can't do it. So I'm going to do the next exchange. 10 becomes 9. And that becomes 10. 0 take away 2, I can't do it. So I'm going to borrow from this column or exchange. That becomes 9. And the 1 comes into here. Now I'm in a place to do the problem or to solve the problem. 10 take away 2 is 8. 9 take away 1 is 8. 9 take away 0 is 9. 5 take away 2 is 3. And there's nothing to take away from the 2. So essentially it's just going to drop down in here. So we have to put the answer into the box. 23.988. And again, the last example that I've got, again, looks relatively straightforward, but we've got a spot that we've got a decimal and we've got a whole number. Now, a lot of you might be able to look at this and just see what the answer is, and that's absolutely fine. If you can see it and do it mentally, great. But if we just time ourselves doing this in a written sense, we can guarantee the mark. Let's go. Decimal, decimal, decimal. 9, take away 1.9, placeholder 0. 9 take away 0, we can't do it, so we're going to exchange. That becomes 8. This becomes 10, or we have 10. So 10 take away 9 is 1. 8 take away 1 is 7. The answer is 7.1. Put the answer into the box. We get the mark. That probably took 20 seconds, 15 seconds. And again, we can do it mentally, but if we just sometimes mentally we just make a little mistake, I definitely recommend just running through the process with really clear presentation, utilizing the decimals, the layout of making sure that the decimals are living in the same street in their own house in the middle of their house, and we will get the mark. So again, to finish off with, we've got some subtraction from whole number questions. Once again, make sure you are spotting the fact, what's the problem? The problem is we have a whole number and a decimal number. But we spot the decimal and we make sure that we go into decimal, decimal, decimal in the same column, and then we lay the question out effectively from there. Have a go. Check using your tablets and your phones and your calculators to make sure we've got the right answers. And finally, just for a bit of additional challenge, in scanning through the SATs papers, I couldn't find any questions that were varied representation of decimal subtraction. So I still thought I'd put some in. So again, it might be that we see where we've got this blue box, and this blue box is where we need to write the answer. We see that in these examples. If we looked at varied representation last week, there was lots of examples like this of basic addition in questions 1 to 10, where we saw lots of this. So again, this example is 3.6 take away something equals 1.7. Okay. So again, if we thought about this last week and we thought about subtraction and remembering that subtraction is just the difference, if we wanted to solve this type of problem, we would carry out a subtraction by doing 3.6 take away 1.7, and that would give us this answer. And again, we would drop straight into decimal, 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 3.6 take away 1.7, and then we would go through the process. 6 take away 7, we can't do that, so we're exchanging. 16 take away 7 is 9. 2 take away 1 is 1, so the answer is 1.9, and that would give us the mark. So again, it's not to say that we won't get these sort of questions in the SATs. I haven't seen any examples yet. You're much more likely to get whole numbers take away decimals, which I just showed you before. You're very likely to get those. But for challenge, and just to push anybody that wants pushing, here's a set of questions of these varied representation just to finish with. And if you can do these, you can pretty much do anything. So here they are. We've got some addition ones, or well, problems that have the addition symbol in, where we're going to have to carry out varied calculations to solve these. And then there's questions with a subtraction in, where we've got, again, varied representation style questions. But again, as I said, I haven't seen any of these in the SAT, so it's very unlikely that you will see these. But again, this is just for anybody that wants a little bit of extra challenge in preparation for SATs. But don't get too bogged down on these. The main thing to come away from today with is our ability to lay out the decimal first once we see that decimals are in the question, and the key understanding of subtracting from a whole number. We must understand how we subtract from a whole number, not get thrown by it, and just make sure that we go a decimal, 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 lay the question out effectively, and you guys are going to get a lot of marks in your SATs papers, a lot of easy marks, because these are easy questions to solve once you know how to lay out the decimals.
Well, that's week 2 over and done with. Decimal addition, decimal subtraction, subtracting from whole numbers, which, as I've said in the questions that we've just gone through, in recent SATs papers, there's been lots of those questions, and for me, they're easy marks. We just have to understand how we lay out the decimal, as we've talked about, and we'll get those easy marks using decimal addition, decimal subtraction, and subtracting from whole numbers. The other thing to think about in future weeks is that this use of decimal is really going to come in handy when we come to some decimal multiplication as well. And the beauty of that is that if you can use the grid method and you know what we've just been taught in terms of how to lay out your decimals, then decimal multiplication is really simple as well. So those future questions, or those questions that we're maybe losing marks on now, we're going to be getting those marks really easily in the future. So in the coming week, please let me know and comment on the videos. I've had lots of people this week saying that they really understand now from the previous videos. So please let me know how you're getting on. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you keep up to date. There's lots of other short videos going out as well. YouTube Shorts, Instagram and TikTok. We've got lots of short videos where I'm solving SATs questions. That's for SPAG and Arithmetic. So please get involved in those. Have a look for them. There's a lot going out this week on the different channels, and they'll be continuing to go out every single day until SATs. And again, next week there'll be another longer form video like this one, where we really deep dive into the next subject on our journey to 16 weeks to SATs. So thank you for watching. Please comment, please subscribe, and I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you all next week.